In this video, we will discuss the JSF Life Cycle. JSF is a framework for building user interfaces for web applications. It brings component-based model to web application development. It focuses only on user interface details and is not concerned about how the rest of the application is implemented. JSF technology provides a set of UI component classes and associated behavioral interfaces that specify all the UI component functionality, such as holding component state, maintaining references to objects, and driving event handling and rendering for a set of standard components. The JSF lifecycle has 6 phases as defined by the JSF specification. I will present a very high-level view of the JSF lifecycle. The Restore View phase. In this phase, the JSF implementation restores the objects and data structures that represent the view of the request. Of course, if this is the first time the client has visited a page, the JSF implementation must create the view. When a JSF implementation creates and renders a JSF-enabled page, it creates UI objects for each view component. The components are stored in a component tree, and the state of the UI view is saved for subsequent requests. If this is a subsequent request, the previously saved UI view is retrieved for the processing of the current request. Apply Request Values phase. Any data that was sent as part of the request is passed to the appropriate UI objects that compose the view. Those objects update their state with the data values. Data can come from input fields in a web form, from cookies sent as part of the request, or from request headers. Data for some components, such as components that create HTML input fields, is validated at this time. Note that this does not yet update the business objects that compose the model. It updates only the UI components with the new data. Process Validations phase. The data that was submitted with the form is validated if it was not validated in the previous phase. As with the previous phase, this does not yet update the business objects in the application. This is because if the JSF implementation began to update the business objects as data was validated and a piece of data failed validation, the model would be partially updated and in invalid state. Update Model Values phase. After all validations are complete, the business objects that make up the application are updated with the validated data from the request. In addition, if any of the data needs to be converted to a different format to update the model, for example, converting a string to a data object, the conversion occurs in this phase. Conversion is needed when the data type of a property is not a string or a Java primitive. The Invoke Application phase. During this phase, the action method of any command button or link that was activated is called. In addition, any events that were generated during previous phases and that have not yet been handled are passed to the web application so that it cannot complete and any other processing of the request that is required. Render Response phase. The response UI components are rendered and the response is sent to the client. The state of the UI components is saved so that the component tree can be restored when the client sends another request. This concludes our discussion on the JSF lifecycle.